All right, hey everybody, welcome to Digging Deeper, our weekly podcast that dives into what we covered on Sunday morning as part of the sermons and other questions that came up, and just an opportunity to, think a little more deeply, wrestle with the stuff more, and talk about maybe the areas that might have been confusing or really interesting, whatever we come up with. So today we just finished the second week of a series. I'm here with Pastor Bobby, if you're not watching online.
Yeah.
We just finished the second week of a series called Prospering Where God Planted. And the core sort of central element so far has been this specific verse, but really just the story that we read about in the Old Testament storybooks, but also in the prophecies of Jeremiah, who talks about this moment where, because of Israel's unfaithfulness, God eventually chooses to kind of, whether you want to use punish and or prune them, takes them into exile. The Babylonian army, like many ancient empires, when they wanted to consolidate power, would conquer an area and transplant, relocate people, because it would keep them from, if you break people up, they're less likely to riot and things. So hundreds of thousands of Jewish people get taken into exile in Babylon. Jeremiah says, guys, this isn't going to be short. This is going to be 70 years. So, and that picks up essentially where we're like, now, what does it look like? What is Jeremiah's advice? What is God saying to the people about how you should live in this period of time that is going to be so much upheaval and difference and change and not what you want it to be? How do you make the most of it? How do you live in a way that God wants you to? So maybe just like kind of setting that up, like maybe just a quick recap of what kind of, for those that I know, the idea is you listen, you hear the message before you listen to Digging Deeper, but it's been a couple of days now. We're a day late because of Martin Luther King. So just maybe a brief summary or recap of kind of what you shared of what the advice was to the Israelites.
Yeah, so it's all found in Jeremiah 29. And it's the idea, it's verses 4-7. And Jeremiah essentially tells them what to do. He says to build homes and plan to stay. He says to plant gardens and eat the food they produce. He says to multiply and don't dwindle away. Have babies and find spouses for your children. Let them have grandchildren. And then he tells them to pray for their city, for its welfare will determine their welfare. And then he also, before that, says, work for the peace and the prosperity of the place where I have sent you. So the idea of it is there's a lot of things that they are supposed to be doing because God does have a good plan on the other side of it. And I think the one that speaks most specifically to that good plan in 70 years is this idea of don't dwindle away. Don't dwindle away. Have babies. Have lots of babies. Have lots of grandchildren. Like, prosper here. Grow here. Don't shrink back, because God's good plans will happen in 70 years.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful idea. And you kind of started off with, you looked at this group of Jewish people known as the Essenes, who you did a good job explaining it. You went to Israel, you had a chance to see the caves of Qumran, which are pretty wild. You can't actually see them; they're cordoned off, but you can from a distance.
You can't walk into them.
Complete side note, but just like, so how long ago did you go to Israel? When was
I was
trip?
in Israel in 2019 and in 2022.
22. Okay, so you went back after COVID.
Yeah.
I think I might have mentioned before, I was one of the last flights out of Israel in March of 2020.
Wow.
So there were people, I don't mean this in a racially insensitive way, but there were literal Chinese tourists who had COVID, and so the nation was shutting down and kicking everybody out while we were there. And, as Americans, we're like, COVID, this is stupid. This is just you're getting sick. Stop it. Calm down, everybody. I get home, and a month later, the world shuts down. But Israel was just an amazing experience for me. What, outside of maybe, we're just deviating a bit from like the actual message, but just like, what was the experience of going there like for you, and how did it affect your understanding of the Bible, your walk with, like, what did it do for you to go there?
Yeah, so 2019 was interesting. So I've been twice, and I think I've told you this before. You're smarter than I am, and so you probably absorbed it a lot faster than I did.
It's not smarter. It's just different focus of what you want to learn.
But no, you probably absorbed it faster than I did. So in 2019, when I went, you have a tour guide, you have all the things, you visit all the sites. It felt like at times drinking from like a fire hydrant. It's
very hard to pay attention to anything.
I took the
it's
guy's
a blur.
like voice out of my ear, because you wear those earbuds to hear him tell you everything. Because there were times when I'm like, I can't absorb more information. I just want to experience it and be here. But that trip was pretty cool because it was with a lot of young adults. So we did a lot of hiking. So like instead of driving to the top of Mount Arbel where the Sea of Galilee is, we hiked up the Mount Arbel.
You walked up it.
Yeah. So those
long did that
caves, about an hour and a half, 2 hours, I think. There's caves on the side of that mountain where the Israelites, sort of like hunkered in, and that's where they like lowered the elevators down to extinguish the Israelites in that zone. So we were able to walk to those caves and actually seeing them. It was super unique. So that trip was really cool because we had a lot of that, a lot of walking and walking through the countryside, not just driving. But it felt difficult to absorb all the information. When I went back in 2022, it felt like I was understanding all of it to a greater level because it wasn't, it's like going somewhere twice. So yeah, for my faith, I remember standing, like on the steps. There's no gate there anymore, but I believe it's right there next to the Western Wall. But it's the steps Jesus would have walked up to walk into the temple. And they're sealed off. You can't walk through them anymore. But I still remember like just even thinking about the fact that was the steps Jesus walked to go to that place, and to be there on the same place, to hear the stories of the Bible and then see the place specifically where it happened. Honestly was just inspiring. I think it's the pool where the angels stirred the water. Is that Bethesda?
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but they excavated that, and the 5 porticos, they found all of them.
Yeah.
And like a long time, they thought it didn't exist because it wasn't found, and then it was. And so stuff like that, man, is just, I don't know, it makes the stories more than just stories.
Yeah, and if it makes you feel any better, I had the same experience.
Yeah.
I got home and felt bad because I was like, well, first of all, that cost me like $4,000, and I left my kids for 10, 12 days. I'm like, I don't know if I remember anything. I was like, I gotta go back. I just was so tired. I was so tired because you can't sleep, and but I do remember many of the moments of like, I went with my doctoral group, which was the complete opposite experience because we had 11 guys my age and about 40 people that were all over 60 that sort of paid the extra money to make the trip worth it. And so we were snailing it was like the slowest moving thing. You cannot imagine how frustrated I was. I was like, come on, let's go. There's stuff to see. And they're like, we stopped every hour and a half for coffee for 10 straight days. I was like, how much coffee do you people need? Let's go. I want to see this place. But no, I remember it being pretty exciting. And I do remember the caves of Qumran. We were part of my, the guy that ran my doctoral program, Scott McKnight, would stop at all these locations and usually do like a teaching or a connection from some part where you're studying. And the Dead Sea Scrolls were something that my degree was Old New Testament historical context. So the Qumran community, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Teacher of Righteousness, a lot of those kind of things that came out of that were things that I had been absorbing the book and the words for 3 years. And you stand there and you're like, oh, this is a real place. These are real people. And that was sort of like a sobering moment. I think the most interesting moment for me was actually we're in the bus and I'm really tired and we're just driving and we're out in the middle of nowhere. Like, I don't know. And it just looks like, to me, it looked like the Midwest. Some parts of Israel look like the mountains around Alpine. This just looked like a big open grassland area, and the bus stops, and I get really kind of grumpy because I'm just tired. I don't know. I feel like I hadn't slept in like 2 days. I'm like, why are we stopping? And like, we just want to get out here for a second. I'm like, there's nothing here. What are we doing here? And I'm complaining, and it's my spiritual gift. And we walk out, and we're standing in this big open space. Nothing. It's just nothing. I'm like, why did we just do this? And he goes, this is probably where David killed Goliath. And you're like, oh, holy smokes. Wait, right here? Like, this is the moment. So yeah, it's wild. If you can get to Israel, you should go. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to going back.
Yeah, me too.
And that was a 10-minute offshoot of what we're going to know today. But specifically, let's come back to the message. So you started talking about the Essenes, and you had a group of people who you're 500 years later after Jeremiah. The Israelites have returned for the most part. They came back with Nehemiah after God said it'd be 70 years, and it was.
Yeah.
But when they come back, things aren't good for a lot of people. Like a lot of stuff isn't what it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. You have a group of people saying, this isn't right. We don't like this. We're going to separate and go do our own thing and create our own community kind of thing. And so this kind of point you made was, in some ways, they were making a mistake that Jeremiah was telling the Israelites not to make about what does it mean to be settled where you're at. And like, talk about that connection.
It definitely felt like a parallel. It's the idea that because they recorded all the Dead Sea Scrolls are the ones writing them down, so they would know the text well. It's the question of like, did they think about that when they were recording that portion of Jeremiah? It would have been 29 at their time, but when they were recording that portion of Jeremiah, did they process and think about their current circumstance and what they're deciding to do? Because the truth is, Jeremiah's wisdom that he gave the Israelites was wisdom. It was like it's smart life leadership to position yourself well for the future. Like that's essentially what he's telling them to do. And the Essenes just did the opposite. I think I made the comment yesterday, and it's debated. You might be able to speak more to it, whether or not they believed in marriage or not. But most people would say that it looks like they don't believe in marriage because they were God's chosen people, and they were going to get it all sorted out without anything else. So they didn't plan for their future. And then the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's what's interesting about them. They were tucked away in some caves, early 1st century, maybe, 1st, 2nd century before Christ, tucked away in caves and forgotten about. Yeah. No one even knew they existed for 1900 years, which blows my mind. But yeah, so they did things that didn't position them well for the future. And Jeremiah's giving advice going, hey, position yourself well for the future. I made this comment yesterday too in one of the services. I don't know if I made it in both. But the idea of like, sometimes we want justice. And I think I made it in first service, maybe second. But it's the idea that God's going to get his justice. Like Babylon's a rough spot. God takes care of himself, but he had a different, like he didn't need them to do what he was going to do in the future. Like God had him like that taken care of. God needed them to focus on something else. And so yeah, I just wonder, like, did the Essenes, were they focused on the wrong thing? Were they thinking about, weren't thinking about preservation? Did they think of themselves more highly than they ought? That's a reference to a New Testament verse there. But yeah, where did it go? So yeah, that was the thought on it. The Essenes had nothing to do with that book of Jeremiah, other than the fact they would have written it down a bunch of times.
I think their connection, though, historically would be when you look at the big story. If you were a Jewish person and you knew the story, and we were having a conversation, and you said, okay, our ancestors were promised this land, and it was supposed to be amazing and blessed, and everything was God, milk and honey, and we were going to be the greatest nation on earth. And instead of that, our ancestors get taken off into slavery. We lose all of our land. All these foreigners come and take it. We thought it's better, but it's still not better. It's 400 or 500 years later. Now Rome controls it, and our priests are all corrupt. They're all in Rome's pocket, and this all sucks. Nothing is the way it's supposed to be. You would ask this question. You would say, why? Why is it not the way it's supposed to be? And you would look back, and you'd say, well, it's because we weren't actually obeying God and doing what we're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And so anyone living at that time would have agreed with that answer. They all agree with that answer. Everybody agreed the reason things aren't right is because we weren't doing the right thing. What they didn't agree on is what is the right thing. And this is where these different groups are so interesting, because the Pharisees, their answer to the question, what is the right thing, was we weren't dedicated to obeying Torah. We need to be diligent in our obedience to it. So they would go around and try to get people to obey things. And, when Jesus interacted with them, it's like, well, actually, what I was really concerned about wasn't your minutia, the law. It was the bigger issues you weren't following the heart. Whereas the Essenes were like, part of their answer was the temple purity, the ritual cleanness that we're supposed to uphold, going back to Leviticus and Numbers. So the whole temple's corrupt. We need to go and do our own thing, separate themselves. And I think what's interesting about that, and I was processing this when you were talking, because this is something I've spent a lot on my own time and research and things, is when God tells the Israelites how to live in Babylon, in some ways, there's almost this dual sense of like, I'm telling you people what to expect during this punishment. Like, hey, when I told you like you're grounded if you stay in your room, it's going to be a while. You might want to just lay there in bed and pout. You might actually want to be productive or something like. But there was more than that, because when you read the book of Daniel, what you see is what happens when these Jewish people, and not all of them, when some of the Jewish people choose to actually do what God told them to do, they, as Daniel, and I quoting myself here, they shine like stars.
Yeah.
And
they're, what is it, 10 times better? Is it 10 times better? 12 times better?
Well, yeah, the idea, though, is the Babylonians are impacted.
Yeah.
When the Jewish people actually say, okay, I know we're in timeout here, which is a fun way to say it. I know we're being disciplined. I know this isn't the way that our world's supposed to be. But instead of just being like, whoa, woe is us, life sucks, we're just being punished, let's go ahead and still be the people God's called us to be. Let's pray for the city. Let's impact the world around us. Even if this isn't where we want to live, it's not where we want to be, and we don't like the people that are in charge, let's still be the people of God and shine God's light to the world.
Yeah.
And when they do that, and I think that's what the whole book of Daniel shows us, is when some members of the Jewish community actually say, I'm going to make the most of my time here and let people see who God really is, they literally change it from the inside out and undermine. And some people say, like, were the Jewish people the reason Babylon collapsed and eventually the Persians took over? Was Nebuchadnezzar the king completely undone because of the way that Jewish people interacted with him for the glory of God?
Yeah.
And so this idea of like, pray for the city, like bring peace to it, like treat it as if it's your home, even if it's not your home, isn't just about, hey, I want you to handle your life well and not be, and whatever, but it's also like, what was the purpose of calling the Jewish people in the first place, if not to be a light to the world?
Yeah.
And so when you look at the Essenes, I think the Essenes, and I get this from the scholar Tom Wright, he did a whole thing about this, of like, all of the different groups that Jesus interacted with didn't like him, but they didn't like him for different reasons. The Pharisees struggled that he wasn't a strict follower of the law. The Zealots didn't like him because he told you to forgive your enemies. The Essenes didn't like him because he said, you're the light of the world. You're not supposed to go hide in caves. Like, I don't care that you don't like the current temple system. I don't care that you're upset the Romans have things. You are the light. You're supposed to be a light to the Romans, not distance yourself and go off and complain and whine. Mm-hmm. Like, make the most of where you are and impact Rome. And that's what the Christians did. The Christians said, okay, we're living in a pagan world, but we're going to impact the pagan world. We're not going to run from it. And we're going to change it through the glory of God. And so I just went on a long rant there.
No, I love it, man. I love it. It's honestly, it's so good. Like, even just the context and the additional, historical elements of it, I think just bring to light more to the point of what, like, God has something for us to do. We are to be in the world, not of the world. I mean, the text, even as you're talking, like, I'm thinking of the New Testament text and the statements of Jesus and Paul that speak to exactly what you're referencing. And it's a beautiful thought.
And that then brings up another kind of point you were making. You mentioned this idea of citizenship, which is such an interesting, powerful, weird idea, because, and we don't get this sort of like, there's something that has always kind of irked me, and it's possible that I overreact to it and I need to give it more grace. But I think it's just like this whole concept. There was a song that was super popular, maybe like 10 or 15 years ago. I don't forget who it was by, like Building 421, one of those bands that was named after a verse. And the whole point of the whole song was just, I don't belong here. This isn't my home. I'm just passing through. Like, I'm made for a different thing. And
a modern day I'll Fly Away, Old Glory.
Yeah. And I remember like that. I just didn't like that song because it was like, hold on. First of all, I think you're taking passages and you're misunderstanding them, because when Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world, that word of is the Greek ek, means it doesn't originate here. He didn't say my kingdom isn't for this world. He said it doesn't originate here. The kingdom of God starts in God's throne room, and then we pray that it comes down. our mission, our focus in life is not escaping the world. It's the kingdom of God transforming the world to be what it's supposed to be. And if I live my whole life constantly being like, well, I'm just passing through, I just got to get to my real home. It's like, well, wait, Adam and Eve considered this their home. Before sin, this was home.
Yeah.
God is undoing and recreating and reforming and restoring. So when we read these passages about your citizenship is somewhere else, I think what that does to us, unfortunately, is if I lived in Tarsus or Philippi or you name another Roman colony, and I was a citizen of Rome, I was content to tell myself, Philippi is absolutely my home. I am a Philippian. Like, this is my home. But I'm a citizen of Rome because the government of Rome governs my life. So when the Bible says you are a citizen of heaven, it's not saying just hold on, hold your breath, wait till you die and you get to your real home. He's saying the person who's governing and running your life, his throne is in heaven.
Yeah.
He's in charge, so live that way. Not get out of your, like, where God planted you is home.
Yeah.
And you like make the most of it because it's home. I don't know. I should have led that with a question. I just preached at you for like 10 minutes. How do you interact or think through when people say things like, I'm just passing through?
Yeah, I almost made a joke in my message about the song I'll Fly Away, Oh Glory. It's like, back in the day, I would hear preachers say it like this, and I call them preachers because typically that would be their style. You know what I'm talking about when I say a preacher. They would say that you're so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good. Have you heard that one before?
Many
of course you have. If you're in your 40s, you've probably heard that at least once if you've been in church. But the idea, though, is this concept that we get so focused on. Like, Paul said this. He says, yeah, of course I want to go and be with the Lord, but it's better for you that I stay.
Yeah.
It's this idea, like, if you're here, God has things for us to do. If he wanted us to just go straight to heaven, he'd kill us after we got saved.
Yeah.
But he has work for us to do. And guys, I mean, there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. Like, I don't know. I think sometimes we just, we get so focused on that we miss some of the now. I would say Jesus says we're born again. So I would say we die twice. We die daily, but we die twice. We die when we give our life to the Lord. And obviously we die, when we die a physical death. But the concept of it is we start walking with the Lord, experiencing his presence in our day-to-day life, not when we take our last breath, but when we surrender to ourselves, surrender to God and commit our life to him. That's when we start living in that presence of God. And so that should be a motivation piece for us on what God's telling us to do here. I think oftentimes we want to vacate and run off into the hills, and what is it? Homesteading's the best thing in the world now. Everyone wants chickens and goats and to get off the grid, whatever that means.
I do not.
Me neither.
I suppose other people do.
It's a thing. It's
weird.
And if you like homesteading, great. I would love to borrow some of, I don't know, if your chickens lay eggs, I
want my homestead to be within a short driving distance of Target.
There you go.
And Chili's.
But it's this idea of escapism is a thing that people admire now. And the truth is, there's elements of it that's harder. I don't want to take care of goats and chickens. It's harder. But the idea of it is it's easier. It's easier to get away from society than try to affect and influence society.
You can't say that to people in California, though, because they'll all feel guilty for the fact they're trying to leave because they don't like the government. Which is pretty much exactly what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, if God has you here, if God has you somewhere else, then that's beautiful. God has you there. But if God has you here, God has you here. Where is here?
Make the most of it.
Make the most of it. And if in a year God moves you, I have friends who pastor in cities, and I guess I technically do now as well, though I don't think we have a huge Navy population in Lakeside. But San Diego.
Navy?
Yeah, Navy.
Military. Okay.
Yeah, military. But I have a friend who pastors in Norfolk, and he'll tell me that his church basically rotates out every 2 to 3 years. It's like 50% of his church leave. I think he said it's like 30 to 40% leave annually because they're in the military.
Right.
And one of the things that he deals with there is this idea that military guys don't really always want to invest into this church because they know they're only going to be there for a couple years and they're going to move on.
Yeah.
And the whole thing he pushes them to, and he tries to encourage them around, is, hey, wherever you're at, be there. Be there fully, commit, trust God in it. And when you move, you'll move and then be there fully. But don't sit around and wait until you finally retire from the military to be active in your church and to help your family find community. But live that way now. And it's so easy for us to have a mindset of, well, once I get to blank, then I'll do. Once I make enough money, I'll start tithing. Once I find my career job, then I'll look for the whatever. Once I decide where I'm going to live the rest of my life, then I'll start making friends. Like, we can always wait for the thing that may happen in the future and put everything else on pause. But it's always a bad decision because who knows what tomorrow holds.
That was a big part of your message.
Yeah.
What would you say? Like, don't make a decision about the future. Say your way.
Yeah. Don't put your life on pause for what ifs and maybes.
Right. What ifs and maybes.
Yeah. I mean, and the truth is, like I used my own story as part of that illustration, but I'm here today and God did have something in my future. And there's plenty of people where God does have something, that thing you're dreaming and believing for, in your future. But if it's not here yet, don't just push pause on everything. Like keep moving forward, keep sowing into the kingdom of God, keep giving and being generous, keep serving, keep doing all the things that God's told you to do. I've heard people say it like this too. The way you leave one season is the way you'll enter your next. I'm sure you've probably heard that before. No, that's new. But the idea of it is like, hey, like it'd be like if I knew I was leaving North Carolina for a few months, and I decided, well, I don't really need to read the word right now. I don't really need to like invest in the people here. I don't really need to care. I could probably stop praying. I can pick all that up once I land where I'm going. Well, that's just a bad decision because it's not core to who God's called me to be and who I'm supposed to live. And we do that. I think human beings do that so quickly.
Yeah, it can be really hard. Man, there's just so many things that you said so many good things there. I was trying to like one of the things I'll just kind of pick a couple. I was thinking when you talked about Paul in his statement about I'd rather be out of the body and be Jesus than kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the way that like our sort of 21st century Western mind reads that and hears Paul saying, I'd rather be going and spending eternity with Jesus, which if you read anything else Paul wrote, he didn't believe that. He thought that Jesus was coming back with him probably in the next 10 or 20 years. Like, I think I can't prove this, but I genuinely believe that Paul probably thought he was going to see some of those young people again. Like, because when you read his writing, he doesn't know he didn't know it was going to be 2,000 years and someone come back. Like, he's interacting, especially in Thessalonians, with like, hey, it could happen anytime, any soon. Paul thought, if I die, I'm going to go be with Jesus. And as soon as he's ready, he's bringing me back and he's going to give me a physical body and we all get to rule and reign on this earth again. So that could be really soon. Like, you might see me again, guys. Like that. And so for Paul, it wasn't this like, I just got to escape and get on a cloud. It was like, hey, there's going to be, I think in his mind, probably a fairly short amount of time that I'll just sort of be hanging out with him, but then I'm coming back and the real party starts.
Yeah.
And so this idea of even just like getting to heaven and not worrying about the world. I was in 1 Peter 3 this morning, and there's this passage that I got to be honest, drives me nuts. I wish it wasn't in the Bible, but I definitely wish people understood the context and words better, because I think the King James translates it as the entire world will be laid bare with fire or something like that. And like you read it and it sounds like it says that God is destroying the world, which is not what it says in the Greek. He's actually saying everything that you lived for will be shown for what it is. And the elemental forces that we live for are going to go away and they're going to be pointless. So what did you really live for? Like, that's really what Peter is saying. Like, are you living for the right thing? Because in the end, you're going to find out whether it was worth living for. And so often we read it as like, oh, the whole world's going to blow up, so I might as well just go and litter. Like, no, that's not the point of that passage. Like, everything I do matters. I'm called to make the most of the world I'm in now. And so I really enjoy this whole thing you're doing. And even like, it kind of just wrap it up, but like going back to this idea of citizenship, one of my favorite verses that I've always just been hung up on, Paul's talking to the Philippians who, if you were a Christian living in Philippi in Paul's day, you would have had a sense of shared camaraderie with Jewish people being stuck in Babylon, you know? Like everyone around me disagrees with my lifestyle. I'm constantly under threat. The bishop of our church community is in prison right now. Like, this is so hard to be a Christian. Nobody likes me. And Paul says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the gospel, which in English is like, okay. In Greek, the word conduct yourself, politumoi, is like where we get the word policy or polity. It literally means, it's like the form of city. It is the word for citizenship. So the word that Paul is using, if you were a Greek speaker, was act like a good citizen. I want you to act like a citizen of the gospel of King Jesus. So in this moment, live your life as though Jesus is king and do what he tells you to do, whether you like it or not. Don't just sit in your hands. Don't just be like, oh, whatever, life sucks. No. Jesus is your king. Be a citizen of heaven in every aspect of your life in Philippi right now. And like, that would have been a huge challenge. Like, so I have to go to work and be a citizen of heaven at work. I have to come home and be a citizen. I have to hang out with these friends who are all pagan heretics and be a citizen of heaven. Like, I'm called to do something and be something in the here and now. And so you're right. It's so much easier just to like think of escapism, of be in a scene and go live in a cave and just keep to myself, my holy huddle. It's so easy for a church to fall into that, right?
So easy.
Where we just get so internal and the world's against us. Let's just huddle together and hold each other tight on Sunday mornings. It's like, well, we're the light of the world. What are we doing here? So all that being said, I talked a lot on this one.
I love it, man.
Sorry. So
no, it's great.
We might have 2 more weeks of this
Maybe
series.
have 2 more weeks. We'll see how it plays
For
out.
sure, 1 more week.
Yep.
This week you're gonna really take this idea specific and look at Psalm 1's metaphor of being a tree planted by the water.
Yeah.
What does that look like in our lives to really be planted and prosper? And then I'm actually going to step in on week after that. And then we have a really cool Vision Sunday coming up on February 9th, which you definitely, if you're one of those people that's like, I try to make it once a month. Come more than once a month, but make it February 9th. It's going to be really cool. Just casting vision for the future and where we're going as a church. Just a lot of cool stuff. So this has been a good series and excited to keep it going. And we also we mentioned this before, but man, we got tons of stuff starting up. Yeah. It is the time to get plugged in, right? It's the time to get plugged in. If you're not serving, it's a time to start serving. So many good things happening. We got groups started, Rooted started, all different kinds of stuff. So many opportunities. So just, I don't know, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, this whole idea of prospering planted, like part of prospering where you're planted is saying, okay, you might be in the military and you might be like, I'm only going to be at Rise for another 2 years. Make the most of these 2 years. Get plugged in. Get connected.
You'll never get these 2 years back.
Let's go. I feel like whenever I say let's go, I have to like put a little dash Bobby Harrell after let's go. I never said let's go ever in my life until I met you.
You know what?
And now I say it.
I'm just so honored.
You infected me. Let's go. All right. It's great stuff, man.
Yeah.
And excited to see where it goes. So till then, we'll see you guys next week on Digging Deeper. Thanks, everybody.
See you next time.